The grand halls of Valdoria Palace echoed with whispers and hushed conversations as servants scurried through the marble corridors. King Aldrich stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens. His weathered hands gripped the windowsill as he contemplated the troubling reports that had reached his ears throughout the week. Queen Seraphina had been acting strangely lately, and the palace staff had begun to notice. Her once warm demeanor toward the royal children had grown cold and distant. The most concerning reports centered around her interactions with young Princess Ilara, the king's beloved granddaughter from his late son's marriage. The 12-year-old princess had become increasingly withdrawn, often found crying in the castle's hidden alcoves by concerned servants. Lady Margaret, the head governess, had requested an urgent meeting with the king 3 days prior. She spoke in careful, measured tones about incidents she had witnessed between the queen and the princess. The governess described moments where Seraphina would make cutting remarks to the child, criticize her appearance, and dismiss her achievements during royal lessons. More troubling still were the reports of physical confrontations that seemed to escalate each day. The kingdom of Valdoria had always prided itself on its royal family's unity and grace. King Aldrich had married Seraphina 5 years after his first wife's death, hoping to bring stability and maternal warmth to his grieving household. Initially, the marriage seemed blessed. Seraphina appeared devoted to her new stepchildren and grandchildren, participating in charity events and royal duties with apparent enthusiasm. However, as months passed, cracks began to show in the perfect facade. Palace staff noticed that Seraphina's kindness seemed performative, especially when cameras and courtiers were present. Behind closed doors, her true nature began to emerge. She showed particular disdain for Princess Ilara, perhaps jealous of the special bond the child shared with King Aldrich. The princess had been living at the palace since her parents' tragic carriage accident 2 years earlier. King Aldrich had taken special care to ensure she felt loved and protected, often spending evenings reading to her in the library or teaching her about royal duties in his study. This close relationship seemed to irritate Seraphina, who felt her own position threatened by the child's presence and influence over the king. On this particular morning, as King Aldrich stood lost in thought, urgent footsteps approached his study. Sir Edmund, his most trusted advisor and captain of the royal guard, appeared at the door with a grave expression. The elderly knight's usually composed demeanor showed clear signs of distress as he requested permission to speak privately with his sovereign. Edmund had served the royal family for over 30 years, witnessing the rise and fall of multiple generations. His loyalty was unquestionable, and his judgment rarely flawed. When he spoke of serious matters, King Aldrich always listened carefully. The captain's report would prove to be the catalyst that would forever change the dynamics of the Valdorian royal household. The morning had started like any other in the palace. Princess Ilara had attended her lessons with her tutors, showing remarkable progress in languages and mathematics despite her recent emotional struggles. She possessed a sharp intellect and gentle spirit that reminded everyone of her late father's noble character. After lunch, she had been scheduled to join Queen Seraphina for a walk in the palace gardens, a weekly tradition that had been established to help build their relationship. What transpired during that walk would shock the entire palace staff and set in motion a series of events that would test the very foundations of the royal family's reputation. Sir Edmund had been conducting his routine security rounds when he heard raised voices coming from the rose garden. Initially dismissing it as gardeners discussing their work, he continued his patrol until the voices grew more heated and distinctly female. Recognizing the voices as belonging to the queen and young princess, Edmund quietly approached the garden's edge, positioned behind a large hedge that provided cover while allowing him to observe the situation. What he witnessed would haunt him for years to come and force him to make one of the most difficult decisions of his distinguished career. The scene that unfolded before him challenged everything the royal guard had been taught about protocol and loyalty. Queen Seraphina stood facing Princess Ilara, her face contorted with anger and frustration. The child appeared small and frightened, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as she listened to the queen's harsh words about her behavior, her appearance, and her unworthiness to bear the royal name. As the confrontation escalated, Sir Edmund realized he was witnessing something that went far beyond a simple family disagreement. The queen's behavior toward the child was becoming increasingly aggressive, and the captain found himself in an impossible position between his duty to protect all members of the royal family and his obligation to maintain discretion in family matters. The tension in the garden reached a breaking point when Princess Elara, despite her young age, attempted to defend herself against the queen's accusations. Her voice, though trembling, carried the dignity and strength that had been instilled in her through years of royal training. This show of spirit seemed to infuriate Serafina even more, setting the stage for an incident that would require immediate intervention. Sir Edmund gripped his sword hilt, not in preparation for violence, but as a source of strength and resolve. He knew that whatever happened next would require him to act decisively, regardless of the political consequences. The safety and well-being of Princess Elara had become his primary concern, superseding all other considerations of royal protocol and hierarchy. As the captain prepared to intervene, he caught sight of another figure approaching the garden from the palace's main entrance. King Aldrich himself was walking purposefully toward the rose garden, apparently having decided to join the scheduled walk between his wife and granddaughter. The timing could not have been more providential, as the king would soon witness firsthand the true nature of the relationship between his wife and the precious child he sought to protect. King Aldrich's footsteps echoed softly on the garden's stone pathway as he approached what he expected to be a pleasant scene between his wife and granddaughter. The afternoon sun filtered through the ancient oak trees that bordered the palace grounds, casting dappled shadows across the meticulously maintained flower beds. He had decided to surprise them both with his presence, hoping to witness the growing bond between Serafina and young Elara that would bring him such joy. As he rounded the corner near the fountain that had stood in the garden for over 2 centuries, the king's expectations were shattered by the harsh reality before him. Instead of the warm, familial scene he had envisioned, he discovered his wife standing over his granddaughter in a threatening manner, her voice raised in anger and her gestures aggressive and intimidating. Princess Elara stood frozen in place, her small frame trembling as tears streamed down her pale cheeks. The child's royal composure, so carefully cultivated through years of training, had completely crumbled under the weight of Serafina's verbal assault. Her hands shook as she attempted to maintain some semblance of dignity while facing the queen's wrath. King Aldrich stopped abruptly, hidden momentarily behind a large rosebush, as he tried to process what he was witnessing. The words flowing from his wife's mouth were cruel and calculated, designed to wound and humiliate rather than educate or correct. She spoke of the princess as a burden, an unwanted reminder of the past, and questioned her right to live in the palace among her betters. The shock of hearing such venom directed toward his beloved granddaughter left the king momentarily paralyzed. Serafina's public persona had been so carefully crafted that this revelation of her true character struck him like a physical blow. The woman he had married, trusted, and elevated to the highest position in the kingdom was systematically destroying the spirit of an innocent child. As King Aldrich remained hidden, gathering his composure and determining his course of action, the confrontation in the garden escalated dramatically. Queen Serafina, perhaps emboldened by what she perceived as the princess's defiance, raised her hand and delivered a sharp slap across the child's face. The sound echoed through the garden like a gunshot, causing birds to scatter from nearby trees. Princess Elara stumbled backward from the force of the blow, her hand instinctively moving to her reddened cheek. Despite her pain and shock, the brave young girl refused to cry out, maintaining the dignity that had been instilled in her since birth. Her silence seemed to further enrage the queen, who prepared to strike again. At that precise moment, Sir Edmund emerged from his concealment behind the hedge, his training and instincts overriding any considerations of protocol or political consequence. The veteran guard's voice boomed across the garden as he commanded the queen to stop her assault on the princess immediately. His hand rested firmly on his sword hilt, not as a threat of violence but as a symbol of his authority and determination. The sudden appearance of the captain of guards caught Queen Serafina completely off guard, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and fury at being discovered in such a compromising position. She attempted to regain her composure quickly, straightening her posture and smoothing her disheveled hair while searching for an explanation that might minimize the severity of what had just transpired. Sir Edmund moved swiftly to position himself between the queen and the princess. His protective instincts fully engaged, his weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes burned with righteous anger at what he had witnessed. Years of military training and court experience had prepared him for many situations, but watching a queen assault a helpless child tested the very limits of his professional restraint. King Aldrich chose this moment to reveal himself, stepping out from behind the rose bush with a face that had transformed from shock to cold fury. His presence immediately changed the dynamics of the confrontation, as all parties realized that the highest authority in the kingdom had witnessed the entire shameful episode. The king's usually warm and kindly eyes now blazed with an intensity that few had ever seen. The silence that followed was deafening. Queen Seraphina's face drained of color as she realized the full implications of her husband's presence and what he had undoubtedly observed. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely, revealing the true nature that she had hidden so skillfully for years. There would be no explanations or excuses that could adequately address what had just occurred. Princess Alara, despite her youth, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. She curtsied deeply to her grandfather, her training in royal protocol providing her with a familiar anchor in the chaos of the moment. The visible mark on her cheek served as undeniable evidence of the queen's assault, making any attempt at denial futile. King Aldrich's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of absolute authority and barely contained rage. He addressed his wife in tones that made it clear this was not a request or suggestion, but a royal command that would be obeyed without question. The transformation in his demeanor was startling, as the gentle grandfather became the powerful sovereign who had ruled Valdoria with wisdom and strength for over 3 decades. Sir Edmund maintained his protective stance near the princess while carefully observing the unfolding family drama. His presence served as both witness and guardian, ensuring that no further harm would come to the child while the king dealt with his wife's inexcusable behavior. The captain's military bearing and obvious determination sent a clear message that he would intervene again if necessary. The queen attempted to speak, to offer some explanation or justification for her actions, but King Aldrich's raised hand silenced her before she could utter a word. The monarch's expression made it clear that he had heard and seen enough to render judgment on the situation. The time for explanations had passed, and consequences would now follow swiftly and decisively. As the confrontation reached its climax, other members of the palace staff began to appear at the edges of the garden, drawn by the commotion and the unusual sight of the captain of guards in a defensive posture. Servants and courtiers watched from a respectful distance as their king dealt with a crisis that threatened to shake the very foundations of the royal household. The afternoon sun continued to shine down on the garden, but the pleasant atmosphere had been irrevocably shattered by the revelation of Queen Seraphina's true character. What had begun as a simple walk between stepmother and stepdaughter had evolved into a confrontation that would determine the future of the Valdorian royal family and test the bonds that held the kingdom's most important relationships together. The tension in the palace garden reached its breaking point as King Aldrich stepped forward, his royal presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. The afternoon breeze rustled through the rose bushes, providing an eerily peaceful backdrop to the unfolding drama that would forever change the course of Valdorian royal history. Without uttering a word, the king moved directly to his granddaughter's side, his gentle hands carefully examining the red mark on her cheek where Seraphina's slap had landed. Princess Alara looked up at him with eyes filled with pain and confusion, seeking comfort and protection from the man who had always been her refuge in times of distress. The sight of the child's wounded face only intensified the monarch's resolve. King Aldrich's voice, when he finally addressed his wife, carried the full weight of his authority and disappointment. He spoke in measured tones that somehow made his words more powerful than any shouting could have achieved. Each syllable dripped with controlled fury as he demanded an explanation for what he had witnessed, though his tone suggested he had already passed judgment on the situation. Queen Seraphina attempted to maintain her composure, but the facade she had so carefully constructed over the years was crumbling rapidly under her husband's penetrating gaze. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched for words that might somehow justify or minimize her actions. The excuses that formed in her mind sounded hollow, even to her own ears, and she realized that no explanation could adequately address the severity of her behavior. Sir Edmund remained vigilant, his trained eyes constantly scanning the surroundings while maintaining his protective position near the princess. The captain understood that his witness testimony would likely be required in whatever proceedings followed this incident. His presence also served as a deterrent against any further aggressive behavior from the queen. who now found herself completely isolated in her disgrace. The growing audience of palace staff watched from strategic positions throughout the garden, their faces reflecting shock and disbelief at what they were witnessing. Many had suspected that something was amiss in the royal household, but none had imagined they would witness such a dramatic confrontation between the king and queen. The servants exchanged meaningful glances, understanding that they were observing a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. King Aldrich knelt beside Princess Alara, his weathered hands gently cupping her face as he examined the injury inflicted by his wife. The tenderness he showed toward his granddaughter stood in stark contrast to the cold fury he directed toward Serafina. The child leaned into her grandfather's embrace, finally allowing herself to seek the comfort and security that his presence provided. The king's decision, when it came, was swift and decisive. He stood slowly, his impressive height and bearing making him appear even more formidable as he prepared to deliver judgment on the situation. The years of ruling Valdoria had taught him that moments of crisis required clear, immediate action rather than prolonged deliberation. The safety and well-being of his granddaughter took precedence over all other considerations, including his marriage. With a voice that carried across the entire garden, King Aldrich commanded his wife to accompany him immediately to the palace's main hall. The tone brooked no argument or delay, making it clear that this was not a request, but a royal decree that would be obeyed without question. The king's use of formal address rather than Serafina's name signaled a fundamental shift in their relationship that everyone present immediately understood. Queen Serafina's face reflected a mixture of fear, anger, and desperate calculation as she realized the full implications of her situation. The carefully orchestrated life she had built as Queen of Valdoria was unraveling before her eyes, and there seemed to be no way to salvage her position. Her attempts to maintain dignity in the face of disgrace resulted in a stiff, artificial posture that fooled no one. Sir Edmund received a subtle nod from the king, understanding immediately that he was to escort the queen to ensure compliance with the royal command. The captain's military training had prepared him for difficult situations, but managing the aftermath of a domestic crisis within the royal family presented unique challenges. His loyalty lay clearly with the king and the protection of Princess Alara, making his duties in this situation straightforward despite their complexity. As the procession toward the palace began, Princess Alara remained close to her grandfather's side, her small hand clasped firmly in his larger one. The child's resilience was remarkable, but the emotional toll of the afternoon's events was evident in her pale complexion and subdued manner. King Aldrich's protective instincts were fully engaged as he guided his granddaughter away from the scene of her humiliation. The walk through the palace corridors that followed was conducted in complete silence, broken only by the sound of footsteps echoing off the marble floors and vaulted ceilings. Servants and courtiers who encountered the grim procession quickly stepped aside, their curious glances taking in the unusual sight of their queen being escorted under guard, while the king comforted a visibly distressed Princess Alara. Word of the incident began to spread throughout the palace with remarkable speed, as servants whispered urgent messages to one another and courtiers speculated about the implications of what they had witnessed. The carefully maintained atmosphere of royal dignity and harmony that had characterized Valdoria Palace was being rapidly replaced by an undercurrent of tension and uncertainty about what would happen next. Lady Margaret, the head governess, appeared in one of the corridors and immediately took charge of Princess Alara's care. The experienced woman's face reflected deep concern as she observed the child's condition and the mark on her cheek. Her previous reports to the king about the queen's behavior suddenly took on new significance as the pattern of abuse became undeniably clear. The Great Hall of Valdoria Palace had witnessed many important moments in the kingdom's history, from coronations and weddings to diplomatic negotiations and state ceremonies. Now it would serve as the setting for a confrontation that would determine the future of the royal family itself. The ornate surroundings, with their portraits of previous monarchs and symbols of royal authority, provided a fitting backdrop for the exercise of absolute power. King Aldrich's transformation from loving grandfather to stern monarch was complete, as he prepared to address the crisis that threatened his family's stability. The man who had shown such tenderness toward his injured granddaughter now embodied the full authority of the crown, ready to make decisions that would protect the innocent and punish the guilty regardless of personal cost. The afternoon sun streaming through the tall windows of the great hall cast long shadows across the floor. symbolically representing the darkness that had fallen over what should have been a harmonious royal household. The stage was set for a reckoning that would test the very foundations of duty, loyalty, and justice that held the kingdom of Valdoria together. The great hall of Valdoria Palace had never witnessed such a tense and emotionally charged confrontation as the one that unfolded on that fateful afternoon. The magnificent chamber, with its soaring ceilings adorned with centuries-old frescoes depicting the glory of past monarchs, seemed to echo with the weight of royal authority as King Aldrich prepared to render judgment on his wife's inexcusable behavior. Queen Seraphina stood in the center of the hall, her earlier attempts at maintaining dignity now completely abandoned as the reality of her situation became undeniably clear. The woman who had once commanded respect and admiration throughout the kingdom now appeared small and vulnerable under the disapproving gazes of those assembled to witness her downfall. Her elaborate gown, chosen that morning to project elegance and authority, now seemed like a costume that no longer fit her diminished circumstances. Sir Edmund maintained his position near the Queen, his military bearing serving as both guard and witness to the proceedings. The captain's weathered face showed no emotion, but those who knew him well could detect the barely controlled anger simmering beneath his professional exterior. Years of loyal service to the crown had prepared him for many challenges, but watching a queen abuse a defenseless child had tested the very limits of his restraint. King Aldrich began his formal address with words that would be remembered and quoted for generations to come. His voice carried across the vast space of the hall, reaching every corner where servants, courtiers, and guards had gathered to observe this unprecedented moment in Valdorian history. The monarch's tone was measured and deliberate, each word carefully chosen to convey both his personal disappointment and his royal authority. The charges against Queen Seraphina were laid out methodically and without mercy. King Aldrich spoke of the sacred trust she had violated, the innocent child she had harmed, and the dishonor she had brought upon the crown itself. He detailed the reports he had received from palace staff about her pattern of cruel behavior, making it clear that the afternoon's violence was not an isolated incident but the culmination of months of systematic abuse. As the king spoke, flashbacks of previous incidents began to surface in the minds of those present. Servants remembered times when they had found Princess Elara crying inexplicably, when the child had appeared at meals with mysterious bruises, or when she had seemed unusually fearful in the Queen's presence. The pieces of a disturbing puzzle were falling into place, revealing a pattern of cruelty that had been carefully hidden from public view. Queen Seraphina's attempts to interrupt or defend herself were met with stern silence from the king, who made it clear that her time for explanations had long since passed. The woman who had once wielded considerable influence over court affairs now found herself completely powerless, reduced to the status of a defendant awaiting judgment for her crimes against the royal family. The formal charges were severe and comprehensive. King Aldrich spoke of assault against a member of the royal family, abuse of her position as queen, violation of her sacred duties as a stepmother, and bringing dishonor upon the crown of Valdoria. Each charge carried serious consequences under both royal law and the ancient traditions that governed the behavior of those privileged to serve the kingdom in positions of highest honor. Princess Elara, who had been placed in the care of Lady Margaret during the proceedings, was brought forward to provide her own testimony about the Queen's behavior. Despite her youth and the trauma she had endured, the brave child spoke clearly and honestly about the months of verbal abuse, physical intimidation, and emotional cruelty she had suffered at Seraphina's hands. The princess's testimony was devastating in its simple honesty. She described being told she was unwanted, being punished for imaginary transgressions, and being made to feel ashamed of her very existence within the palace walls. Her words painted a picture of systematic psychological torture that had been carefully hidden behind closed doors while the Queen maintained her public facade of maternal concern. Sir Edmund was called upon to provide his own witness testimony about the afternoon's events. The veteran soldier's account was precise and unflinching, describing exactly what he had observed in the garden and the immediate danger he had perceived to the princess's safety. His reputation for honesty and integrity made his words carry enormous weight with everyone present. The captain's testimony also revealed that this was not the first time he had been concerned about the Queen's treatment of Princess Elara. He spoke of previous occasions when he had noticed the child's distress, though protocol had prevented him from intervening until he witnessed actual violence. His regret at not acting sooner was evident in his voice as he described the subtle signs of abuse he now realized he should have recognized. Other members of the palace staff were invited to share their observations, creating a comprehensive picture of Serafina's true character that contradicted everything she had publicly represented. Servants spoke of finding the princess hiding in storage rooms to avoid the queen, of overhearing cruel comments and threats, and of witnessing the gradual deterioration of the child's spirit under constant psychological pressure. The weight of evidence against Queen Serafina became overwhelming as witness after witness confirmed the pattern of abuse that had been carefully concealed from the king's view. The woman who had seemed so devoted to her new family had revealed herself to be a calculating manipulator who had used her position to torment an innocent child while maintaining a facade of loving concern. King Aldric's judgment, when it finally came, was swift and decisive. The man who had shown such tenderness toward his granddaughter now demonstrated the steel backbone that had made him an effective ruler for over 3 decades. His words carried the full authority of the crown as he pronounced sentence on the woman who had betrayed every trust placed in her. The punishment announced by the king was both personal and political, addressing not only Serafina's crimes against Princess Ilara, but also her violation of the sacred duties that came with her royal position. The consequences would extend far beyond the palace walls, affecting diplomatic relationships, succession planning, and the very image of the Valdorian monarchy itself. As the formal proceedings drew to a close, the assembled crowd began to understand that they had witnessed a defining moment in their kingdom's history. The events of this afternoon would be discussed and analyzed for generations, serving as a reminder that even those in the highest positions of power must answer for their actions when they abuse the innocent and betray the sacred trusts placed in them. The great hall, which had earlier buzzed with tension and uncertainty, now filled with a different kind of energy as justice was served, and the truth finally came to light. The shadows that had fallen over the royal household were beginning to lift, though the process of healing and rebuilding would take time and careful attention to ensure that Princess Ilara could recover from the trauma she had endured. The immediate aftermath of King Aldric's judgment brought a mixture of relief and somber reflection throughout Valdoria Palace. The sentence pronounced upon Queen Serafina was both swift and comprehensive, reflecting the serious nature of her crimes against Princess Ilara and her betrayal of the sacred trust placed in her as a member of the royal family. The woman who had once held the second highest position in the kingdom now faced complete removal from court life and permanent exile from the realm. Sir Edmund, acting under direct orders from the king, supervised the former queen's immediate departure from the palace. The process was conducted with military efficiency, allowing Serafina no opportunity to cause further disruption or attempt to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Her personal belongings were quickly gathered by servants under guard supervision, ensuring that she retained only basic necessities for her journey into exile. The royal proclamation announcing Serafina's crimes and punishment was distributed throughout the kingdom with unprecedented speed. Town criers in every major settlement shared the news with citizens who had long admired their queen's apparent devotion to royal duty. The revelation of her true character shocked the populace, but the king's decisive action in protecting Princess Ilara earned widespread support from subjects who valued justice and the protection of the innocent. Princess Ilara's recovery became the primary focus of everyone in the palace who had witnessed her suffering. Lady Margaret worked tirelessly to provide the child with emotional support and reassurance, while the royal physician attended to both her physical injuries and the psychological trauma she had endured. The resilience shown by the young princess impressed everyone who interacted with her during this difficult period. King Aldric made significant changes to the palace structure and protocols to ensure that no member of his family would ever again suffer abuse behind closed doors. He established new oversight procedures, expanded the authority of trusted advisors like Sir Edmund, and created safe reporting mechanisms for staff who might witness concerning behavior. The reforms were comprehensive and designed to prevent any repetition of the tragic circumstances that had allowed Serafina's cruelty to continue unchecked. The international implications of the royal scandal required careful diplomatic management. Foreign ambassadors and allied kingdoms needed to be informed of the situation through official channels, with emphasis placed on the king's swift action to protect his granddaughter and maintain the integrity of the Valdorian crown. The crisis was handled in a way that actually enhanced respect for King Aldric's leadership and moral authority. Princess Ilara gradually began to flourish once again under the protective care of her grandfather, and the reformed palace environment. The child's natural intelligence and gentle spirit, which had been suppressed under Serafina's cruel treatment, slowly re-emerged as she gained confidence in her safety and security. Educational tutors reported remarkable progress as the princess threw herself into her studies with renewed enthusiasm. Sir Edmund found himself elevated to an even more prominent position within the royal household, his decisive intervention in the garden having demonstrated both his loyalty and his moral courage. The king appointed him as special protector for Princess Elara, a role that formalized his existing commitment to ensuring her safety and well-being. The captain accepted this responsibility with characteristic dedication and humility. The palace staff, many of whom had suspected the truth about Serafina's behavior but felt powerless to act, experienced a collective sense of relief and validation. Their observations and concerns had finally been acknowledged, and they took renewed pride in their service to a royal family that clearly valued justice and protection of the vulnerable. The work environment became noticeably more positive and supportive. Lady Margaret implemented new educational and recreational programs specifically designed to help Princess Elara rebuild her confidence and social skills. The governess organized activities with carefully selected children from noble families, allowing the princess to develop healthy peer relationships free from the fear and anxiety that had characterized her interactions under Serafina's regime. The rose garden where the fateful confrontation had occurred was transformed into a special sanctuary dedicated to Princess Elara's recovery and happiness. New flowers were planted, peaceful seating areas were created, and the space became a symbol of healing and renewal rather than trauma and conflict. The princess often visited this garden with her grandfather, creating new positive memories to replace the painful ones. King Aldric's relationship with his granddaughter deepened significantly following the crisis. The shared experience of confronting Serafina's abuse created a powerful bond between them, and the king took even more active interest in Princess Elara's education, emotional development, and preparation for her future role in the kingdom. Their evening reading sessions and private conversations became cherished traditions that both looked forward to each day. The Kingdom of Valdoria emerged from the scandal with its reputation not only intact but enhanced by the king's principled response to the crisis. Citizens expressed admiration for their monarch's willingness to take difficult action against his own wife when the well-being of an innocent child was at stake. The incident became a defining moment that demonstrated the true character and values of their royal leadership. Months later, as Princess Elara celebrated her 13th birthday, surrounded by genuine love and support, the transformation in her demeanor was remarkable. The fearful, withdrawn child who had suffered under Serafina's cruelty had blossomed into a confident, articulate young woman who showed every sign of developing into a worthy heir to the Valdorian royal tradition. The birthday celebration itself was a joyous affair that included not only family members but also the palace staff who had played crucial roles in protecting and supporting the princess during her darkest hours. Sir Edmund received special recognition for his courage in intervening when intervention was desperately needed, while Lady Margaret was honored for her dedication to the princess's recovery and education. Looking toward the future, King Aldric began making careful plans for Princess Elara's continued education and gradual introduction to official royal duties. The experience of nearly losing her to Serafina's abuse had reinforced his determination to prepare her thoroughly for leadership, while ensuring that she remained protected from those who might seek to exploit or harm her. The story of Valdoria's royal scandal became a legend that was passed down through generations, serving as a powerful reminder that true nobility lies not in titles or positions, but in the courage to protect the innocent and stand up for what is right, regardless of personal cost. King Aldric's decisive action in the Rose Garden that day established a standard of moral leadership that would influence the kingdom's values for centuries to come. Princess Elara, now confident and secure in her grandfather's love and protection, began to show the qualities that would eventually make her one of Valdoria's most beloved and effective rulers. The trauma she had endured, while terrible, had also developed in her a deep empathy for others who suffered injustice and a fierce determination to use her position to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Kingdom of Valdoria had weathered its crisis with honor and emerged stronger than before, its royal family united in purpose and committed to the highest ideals of service, justice, and protection of the innocent.